During that time, so in this, and the important thing is that during that period, when mathematicians interacted more with natural philosopher at some level, I mean, we went inferior, both mathematics and natural philosophy changed, so physics and mathematics changed, and we became much more connected. Another thing is that the Renaissance humanists, so-called humanists, discovered ancient texts, mathematical texts, and that created a new interest and new study of mathematics, I mean more vigorous studies of mathematics. There was also a realization that mathematics is actually very efficient in learning nature. It was more successful the more it was applied. And then there was the Jesuit pedagogy that was very important. And actually Descartes is a product of this education. And there was emphasis on the study of mathematics. So Descartes is very influential, but he's a big part of this. He was devoted Christian, and so there is also influence. The result is that by the end of the 17th century, mathematics was the mathematician was not under water, I mean below the natural philosophers, and he was one of the intellectual elite, and mathematics was very important. So just to remind you what Galileo say about it, that Galileo is one of the most important natural philosophers, or physicists we would say nowadays. Newton had a similar view, so people who were very, very influential in actually shaping what we call modern science nowadays, had this view that mathematics is the way to go. Then we also said that during this period, there was a change in the experimental method. The scholastic Aristotelian philosophy is not that there were not experimentation, but it wasn't, as central. And during, the scientific revolution, the changes that it became much more prominent and also consolidated. A number of the practices and ideas that we have about experimental method were shaped or anticipated, during the scientific revolution. And the important thing for magic in all these things, that magic promoted both mathematics and the experimental method. So it was instrumental in the development of both. For all these things, just to remind you, and also there was a connection between mathematics and experimental method, because better mathematics means there was the ability to build better instruments, like telescope, microscope, and other things. And historians believe that mathematics help, in this level. And I'm going quickly because we did this already. Medical development, there were, just to remind you, the Galenic tradition, there was a lot of emphasis on text. It's not that there wasn't, experimentation. Galileo did, operated animals, but he didn't, for instance, operate so many human or I don't know, at all. But during this time in the Renaissance, the Assayer, for instance, started to operate corpuses of human, and discovered a lot of things that mistakes. He argued 200 mistakes, in Galileo. And these two pictures, one picture that this is Galenic, Bodinius is a Galenic, his influence is in the Galenic tradition, when there is an investigation or, operation of the body, one looks at the book, While if you look at the Serious, he's actually doing the experiment. He's not doesn't have a book. It's not that he hasn't used the book, but this is symbolic. That one has to be. So it's actually the change is not as radical. I mean, people still look at books and influenced by books. That's the reason why it's so important to translate. I mean, the various texts. I mean, for ambiguity. But there is more emphasis on actually looking and doing the experiment. Okay. And we also said that Harvey, for instance, I mean, did experiments. For instance, these experiments for the blood circulation in the body. I mean, and he's credited with discovering the most complete picture of the blood circulation of the body. Then there was alchemy. Alchemy was always around, but during the Renaissance, it became much more prominent and much more a practice of natural philosophers. So last week, I mean, just after this class, I had a lecture, I mean, a presentation by one of our graduate students about Newton. He went to the Newton archive in Cambridge, and he looked at all the books. I mean, there's a list of all the books. I mean, Newton had about 2,000 books in this archive. And only, unfortunately, it was sold for 270-something or 80-something pounds at some point. I mean, very, very little money because we now sold each of these manuscripts. Fortunate. Luckily, I mean, half of them came back, I mean, to the library, but there were a lot of books, I mean, almost 200 books on alchemy. And actually, Newton has a lot of comments there. Right? And it's clear that he read it very carefully and he quoted in his work and so on. So it's an integral part of his work. And again, Newton is considered one of the most distinguished natural philosophers. Nowadays, we would say one of the most important physicists in the history of science, being anachronistic. Okay, so alchemy became much more prominent and much more like the endeavor of natural philosophers. And for instance, we talked about Paracelsus. I mean, we wanted time to talk more about Paracelsus, but Paracelsus is very important, for instance, in changing the medical, conception of modern medicine. I mean, Paracelsus, using alchemical views, in general, thought that diseases come from infections, which was not, the view before in Galileo. So, for instance, like you do in alchemy, distillation and purification, one way to cure the body is to get rid of this infection. To purify, to distinct, and that's, if you think about it, medication nowadays is very much kind of a modern, anticipation of modern view of medical treatments. Okay. And then there was natural magic and astrology. The important in natural magic and astrology that they encourage people to experiment. That there was this idea that by natural magic and astrology, one can influence. If one knows the secrets of nature, one can do wonders. One can do wonders even by doing something here, influence planets, and by knowing, the position of the planets and other things, one can know things about human beings and so on. There was considered very powerful, and obviously, there were various techniques, and one has to learn this technique. You cannot be just natural magician or astrologist without learning, all these techniques and also practicing them. So partly, is learning and translating books and learning them, but partly is practicing and actually developing and writing books and so on. Okay. So the last part, well, we are getting close to where we were. So magic nowadays is the opposite of science, but what we said, I mean, the natural magic was actually very important, I mean, during the early part of the scientific revolution, and it influenced, I mean, both the interest in mathematics and the development of the experimental methods. What is natural magic? Remember, it's actually not easy to say, I mean, exactly what it is, but we saw one example. Let's say that, for instance, natural magic could cover hidden power of earthly things, so one uses alchemy and so on. One can control hidden power of celestial things by knowing both alchemy and astrology. One can control hidden power, spiritual things, and so on. All these things, I mean, were under the natural magic. But the idea is that they are not like miracles. They actually not involve, I mean, like directly. It's not due to God. I mean, obviously it's due to God because God created the world and the principle and all these things. But it's not like direct intervention. And to make an example, which is a bit anachronistic to the Renaissance, but with a good way of understanding, is the difference between Moses and the magician, the Egyptian magician, when Moses wants to free the people of Israel from Egypt. So Moses is not a magician, he's just a messenger of God. He basically follows the commands of God, and God does the tricks. God, I mean, does the wonders and the miracles. But the Egyptian magician, I mean, managed at least, part all the way to replicate the same events by magic. But at some point, obviously, God, I mean, is too powerful, and the miracles of God cannot be replicated by the magician, and that's kind of convinced, at least partially, I mean, the Pharaoh, I mean, to let the people then change his mind, but it's too late, but to let the people of Israel leave Egypt. So anyway, the historical foundation of natural magic. So there was natural magic already in early Christianity, we said, and that was, I mean, revival of occult sciences and literature in the Roman Empire, where Christianity started. And there was also a revival of Pythagoreanism. We said that Pythagorean, I mean, believed that the world is mathematical in some sense, that the numbers, I mean, that they, for instance, investigated music to see a relation between tones, and they thought that by understanding mathematics one can understand nature, so they became kind of more prominent, and they had, and their views, I mean, were also instrumental to magic. There were the discovery of the Hermetic writing that were attributed to an ancient Egyptian priest. I mean, we don't know that it's really the case, but that's but you know, going more ancient is going more secular. I mean, it's like closer to the ancient times. I mean, it means that there were more miracles, people knew more, and so on. So there's more authority, and people were interested in that, and it also stimulated study of magic and other things. And there was an influence of Judaism. I mean, like for instance, Kabbalah, or before Kabbalah. Sorry, I mean, early mystical Jewish writing in the 4th and the 5th century influenced Christianity, interest in magic. And it was okay in the Roman Empire to have exercise magic provided that one did not use it to harm people, or one did not use it politically to do something, I mean, you know, so it was okay in that sense. And also the church, in order to attract more souls into Christianity, they had to compete with pagan views and practices. And one of the ways to do that is actually to adopt some of these practices and to into Christianity and somewhat, I mean, but make them part of, so people could feel more comfortable, I mean, in the transition. So, for instance, competition between healers, diviners, and priests. So the priest had to know all these things and to compete on the same level, I mean, with this healer that use magic and so on. I think we did all this stuff. Now, it was always, a bit controversial, but it was at least anti-current, and there were a lot of texts on magic, even when officially sometimes magic was not around. So one of the problems, in magic in the Middle Ages, we said, that the Aristotelian scholastic Aristotelian philosophy were not very friendly, to magic. It wasn't part of it, but there were some attempts already during that time to assimilate magic into this philosophy. So, for instance, an example, is a book that was attributed to Albertus Magnus, and Nicholas Moser, and there were some others. Now, the religious and academic establishment sometimes, we are very unhappy with that, but we have looking at all the texts, it seems that we see. Okay, so in the Renaissance, there was again the rediscovery of the hermetic text, and Renaissance natural philosophers translated them. Philosophers and natural philosophers translated them, and they made a big impact. And that was that gave a big impetus to magic, natural magic. Now, important things about the magic that we'll be talking briefly about is the unity of the cosmos, and there are sympathy and interconnection between all things. So you can do things here and influence things very far from here. You can do things or manipulate small things, like in alchemy or other things, and magic, and influence big things. Really depends on the depth of your knowledge of the secret of nature. So the codes of the Renaissance actually sponsored. So, for instance, Marsilio Ficino, translated the Hermetic corpus to Latin, and it was actually by Cosimo de Medici. That was his patron. So there were there were some other projects like this, and they were very important, for the interest in magic and in general in the experimental method, because of that. So another prominent proponent of of magic was Cornelius, and Cornelius said that for them that magic is the most perfect knowledge of all. So suddenly it's not magic that is kind of the periphery, it's like the best knowledge that one can have. I mean, so obviously one has to study magic and become an expert in it. And some also thought about that the magic, the Renaissance magic, is a way to unify religion and to nature and religion, and they thought that the Aristotelian philosophy, which was not religious in the same way, I mean, it didn't talk about creation and so on, was not adequate to do both. So Paracelsus is an example. Paracelsus developed a alchemical and chemical conception of the creation, that God is kind of an alchemist. Alchemist and chemist, I mean, in actually creating things. So it was, I mean, a kind of a whole philosophy in understanding both like the small experiments, but also the big things like creation. But even though it flourished, I mean, there were, again, it wasn't always an easy, it wasn't always easy time with the church. And for instance, an example of the Napolitan magician, de la Porta, he was questioned twice by the Inquisition. Questioned by the